I've seen a lot of people start out and think, oh, well, I can price it at this and, I can make this much. And sometimes it seems like something you're making a lot of money, but there's material costs. There's just so many factors. And I think, that made a big difference having a retail background to come from, and also when my parents took vacation, they weren't totally on vacation. If we went to Disneyland as a family when we were younger, they were always checking in. So you can't really just let go of it. You're always a part of it.
Hey Islanders, and welcome to episode 188 of the Camino Voice. Today I'm here with the owner of Jellyfish Creations and the featured artist of the month in the Loft for September of 2023. Please welcome Julie Rozell. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camino Voice podcast, where I interview local business owners, comedians, singers, and more. I dive into their backstory to find out how they got where they are, what are some of the tips for you to do the same, and find out where they are going. Tune in every week as I interview more of the people you see every day. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camino Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. And hope you guys are having a good August. We are into that second or third week, whatever it is, halfway through August. That's what we are. And it's flying by. Before you know, it's going to be September, back to school, and all of those things. So hope you guys are enjoying your last bit of summer. Wanted to make a quick note to everybody that we have a Cider Fest, Camino Cider Fest, coming up on Labor Day weekend. It's just on Saturday this year. There's 2 time slots that you can sign up for. You'll show up, you'll try a bunch of different ciders from different cideries, local here in the Northwest. And there's going to be food, music. It's going to be a party. So tickets are right now $35 a piece. That ticket gets you 6 tastings. I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. It gets you a number of tastings, a commemorative tasting glass that you get to keep. And we're also going to have merch for sale. There's going to be the cideries. They're going to be selling their stuff as well. So it should be a good time. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys come out for that. And again, that is September, the Labor Day weekend. You know what I'm talking about. September 2nd. That's what it is. Be sure to come out, check it out. I will put a link for the tickets in the show notes. So if you guys are interested in doing that, please do so. Cool. And we will just jump into this. So today I get to interview Julie Rozell, and she is going to be the featured artist of the month for the month of September. And for those of you who have been listening, the featured artist of the month is up here upstairs in the Loft at Camino Commons Marketplace. And it goes through the third week of one month into the second to third week in the following month. So it's going to start it's weird this month because the third Wednesday or Thursday is going to be this coming week. So it's going to be starting this week and going through the second weekish of September. So be sure to come up and check out her stuff that she's bringing in. But we get into all sorts of things here. I really enjoyed my conversation with Julie. Found out that her family had a shoe business in downtown Everett since 1915. So the business almost made it to 100 years old, if I'm correct. As we were talking, we kind of talk about when it closed down, and I couldn't remember the exact, but fascinating. Grew up working in retail. Was working at the age of 10 in the store, doing stuff. In and out of retail, understands that side of the business. So it was a lot of fun talking with her, me being in the retail space. Love hearing about the different things. Just really, I learned a lot kind of from her perspective of how they did retail stuff. And so anyways, then she started doing glass and glasswork and started her own business and using and drawing upon her experience from her childhood and everything else. to getting to this. So really excited about this podcast episode. You're going to learn a lot, both about art and glass and that process and how she goes through that process. But you're also going to learn about business. You're going to learn about how to, kind of some of the ins and outs of retail business and all of that. All of that and more. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Julie Rozell. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camino Voice. Today, I'm here with the featured Artist of the Month for September and the owner of Jellyfish Creations. Welcome to the podcast, Julie Rozell.
Hello.
Did I pronounce your last name right?
Yes.
Oh, good. I didn't ask beforehand, so good. So, before we get started, tell us a little bit about Julie.
I grew up in Everett. My family had a shoe store for 100 years.
Whoa.
So I started working when I was 10. I was not slave labor. I just greeted customers, and we had a mail order business at that time also. And so, so we were a long-established business in downtown Everett.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what was that like? I mean, that's obviously like the shoe business has evolved and changed so much over time. What was that like for your family? Did you hear stories about what it was like when they started it? And
Well, my grandfather and his twin brother started in 1915.
okay,
Yeah, so it was Chester and Lester Beard. And so they had all kinds of funny things that happened because they were twins. And then when the war came, my grand uncle kept the business name, and then my grandfather rented Rumbaugh McLean's, which was Macy's, which is now Funko in downtown Everett.
wow,
Rented the shoe department and stayed there through the war. And then when the war was over, they opened up on Colby. And anybody that knows Stan Borson, who plays the accordion and everything, was one of the featured musicians for the opening of the store. And then we were there from 48 to 95. And
okay,
so
very cool. How did that end up closing up then?
my dad was sort of retiring.
Okay.
And SAS Shoes had asked us to open a concept store. And so we had opened that up, and Dad was sort of stepping back. The business model for that type of shoe store was like a mini Nordstrom's. We were apparel and shoes, multi-line, men's, women's, and children's, higher end things. And it was a challenge to run that many, that many slices of the pie.
Yeah.
And so the business model was changing, parking was changing,
Yep.
and so my folks stepped back and did the concept store that my brother ended up running, and so.
Wow,
Yeah.
very
Anyway.
cool. And when you say the war, do you mean World War I or II?
Two.
Okay, because I always get my dates mixed up. But World War I was not.
It
was kind of in the same.
15 to 18, and then
Okay.
World War II, 33 to 40.
Yes. Somewhere in there.
45,
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I was just like, you're in that time frame. I'm like, it could actually be World War I that she's talking about. So I was just
Yeah.
confirming. Okay, that's very cool. That's so cool too, because I love the idea of like owning, a shoe business way that long ago, and for running it for that long.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how they got into shoes, but shoes was it. So.
Nice. Yeah, and when you talk about like running a retail store that's really based on apparel and footwear, the thing that people don't think about when it comes to those things is that like you have to get so many different designs in all of the sizes, and then
right.
it doesn't matter what you do, but like one time you'll order and you're like, oh, I got the right size. These are the size people buy, and people don't buy your main ones; they buy all the side ones, and then you're like, okay, so now I've got a bunch of mediums and XLs, and then the next time you order, you try and correct, and
Yeah, I think it was harder with apparel than shoes because most of the companies we dealt with, they were, there might be a new style that came out, but the shoes, the companies themselves were long-term business models, and so we could reorder, and so yeah.
Nice.
I also started Birkenstock repair because of my family business. So
Okay.
I also repair Birkenstocks. Not so much anymore, but I have everything if anybody wants to drop their Birkenstocks off. So Birkenstocks were so popular in the 80s and the 90s that they couldn't repair them fast enough in California. And so the salesman said, oh, hey, why don't you learn how to do this? I'm like, oh, I can do that. So anyway, I did. And then I was basically working 2 full-time full-time job. So trying to repair Birkenstocks in the evening after I got home and going, oh my gosh, it's 10 o'clock and I haven't made dinner yet. And I was newly married, and and so it was hard working for my folks all day and then doing that on the side. But it was also natural because I've always done stuff with my hands, and so then doing the repair work kind of just fit in with me, and so
Right.
But yeah, so anyway, that's a piece of me too.
Yeah. So how do you feel like people that grow up in families that are entrepreneurial or small business owners, it puts a different perspective on money and work ethic and different things like that. How do you feel like that affected you growing up?
I think because I started, the Birkenstock repair business, and then now I have my glass. I didn't have the same unrealistic expectations that most people have when they go into business and then can't make it. I knew there had to be a markup in order to be sustainable. I also knew my advantage was working from home in my studio and not having to rent additional space. And so there's so many factors, beyond electricity and employees. And I'm also able to keep it to myself and my husband as occasional slave labor. So he works for cookies. And so I think that made a big difference, just knowing how to price things and just sustainability, over hurdles, what sometimes you just have to work nonstop, and then sometimes you can coast a little bit, but you have to have your hand on it all the time. So.
Yeah, and you always have to be on to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and all of those pieces, they all add up and they help you. I mean, you look at the world differently. You and like you were saying, you understood what was involved, the cost that was involved, not just from a dollars and cents, but that it wasn't going to. Day 2, you weren't going to explode into whatever. It was this longer journey.
Yeah. And I've seen a lot of people start out and think, oh, well, I can price it at this, and, I can make this much. And sometimes it seems like something you're making a lot of money, but there's material costs. There's just so many factors. And I think, that made a big difference having a retail background to come from, and also when my parents took vacation, they weren't totally on vacation. We went to Disneyland as a family when we were younger. They were always checking in, so you can't really just let go of it. You're always a part of it. So
I recently I was talking with my son who's 10 now, and he was asking me how he's like, so when people buy something, you buy something and then you sell it for more? And I was like, well, yeah, that's how it works. And he's like, that doesn't seem fair. And I'm like, well, this is how it works. I kind of explained the supply chain and how that stuff worked. But yeah, it's one of those things that you start learning those things as you're younger, if you're in that type of world.
Yeah. When I was your son's age, I was buying penny candy, and I did not understand the concept of tax. And boy, the store owner had a really robust discussion about tax, and I really challenged him to think outside the box of how to explain to a child that's like, well, I don't understand why this says 10 cents. I want to pay 10 cents for that. What do you mean this other penny? so I get it.
Yeah. Very cool. So then, when did you stop working for your parents then?
My husband was inventing in the kitchen, which was a mistake, and I brought him breakfast, apparently, which was also a mistake, and I turned around to go back in the kitchen, and he had a piece of stretch metal on the floor, and I caught it with my slipper and pulled it into my heel and cut it down to the bone and had to get stitches, and then couldn't walk on that foot and do the normal things for a while. And so I transitioned in probably in 99. But from 10 years old to 99, and that was a few years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And in working in a family business for that long, and one that's been going for so long, what are things that you guys did to make that sustainable? Because some family businesses don't end up being sustainable because of family disagreements and things like that. How did you guys kind of work through those things?
I think it was challenging for my dad when he worked for my grandfather. He was, my dad didn't have vacations for a long time, worked 6 days a week. And even, so I worked, I would work during the summers when I was in high school and a couple days a week in junior high. And And then I worked after school during, the school year and stuff. It was just an expectation that you understood was there and that you did. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It was just such a part of life. And then we'd be open during the holiday times, and it would be Dad and I usually work in the later evening hours during the holidays, and it would be a little slower. So we'd play cards or something, So it was it was just different. It was family time. I don't know. Somehow, Mom and Dad always put everybody else first. So if there was lean times during a recession that happened, one time the employees always got paid first, and so they always were making sure that the business was sustained.
Yeah.
Over, we would just cut back a little bit, and I don't know. Some of that I wasn't totally privy to because I was younger and just trying to exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Growing up and
but all of those things, I think they just give you, again, that new perspective that a lot of people don't end up getting if they just kind of go into working into a job and follow that type of path.
Yeah, I guess I always think in a retail mind, like, oh, I can make this work, and it's different, I think, than working for somebody else. Advantages both ways, where
Absolutely.
you can be done at the end of the day. It's not your responsibility anymore. Working from home and working for myself, I'm always like, oh man, I really should be out there doing this, but I have to do this now. So
yeah. So then, when did you start getting into glass blowing?
it was an accident.
Okay.
So
You have a lot of happy accidents in life.
In 2010, my family and my husband's family both had cabins over on Whidbey Island, and so we'd gone over to spend New Year's, and we did a blow your own experience over on Whidbey, and I blew a lopsided bowl, and I'm like, look at this cool thing I made, it's this wonky bowl, and so we had an idea and approached the artist and said, well, this is what we want to do. We want to make pendants. Can we blow like a cake platter, a flat disc, and then turn them into pendants? And he helped us do that. So I would, input what colors and kind of design I wanted. And then I started assisting, and then I was doing it all the time. And I started assisting at a higher level and not knowing what I was doing, but, just kind of following along. And so we did the first platter. We turned them into pendants. I didn't even know what a bail was to go on. This the part that attaches on the. I didn't know what this was.
Okay.
And I'm like, So my husband took a bunch to work. It was 2 days before Valentine's Day. So I had blown my first thing on January 1st. And by the middle of January, I was starting to create things. And then he took them to work and sold like 45 in 2 days. Of course, it was guys. He was a construction worker, and it was 2 days before Valentine's Day, and most guys hadn't, done anything. And I go, well, oh man, I think I just started a business, So then I was off the cliff and falling, trying to figure everything out on the way down, and I'm like, oh man. So then we just were up and running and started making more platters with the artist I've been working with, and found stores, and so I wholesale and consign now, and I have since 2010.
Okay.
At one point we were up to like 40 stores.
Wow.
And we had, some place in Montana and Idaho and Oregon, and then just a lot of different places, and there's been attrition since then, and lost a lot of places during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And, our stores just naturally close, and so it's kept me really busy since then.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then, you said you were working with the other artists to make the platters, and and looking at your pendant, it's smaller. So then, do you guys break the platters, or what do you mean? Does platter not mean what I think platter means?
Well, I guess if you think about a serving platter, so like a big disc.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure the diameter. So then we cut and shape from there.
Okay.
And so when you blow something, it has to, you created it. It goes in the annealing oven overnight, so it cools down to a temperature just under 100 before you can open the doors, before you get thermal shock for the glass.
Okay.
And then I can take it home, and the product can actually sit for months, years, whatever, until I can get around to monkeying with it.
Okay.
And then we cut it up, and then it has to go through our kiln at home, which is the size of a dining room table.
Oh, wow.
And then we soften the edges to, so it's not sharp or anything. And then it's the pendants. So
okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So is that still your process, or you're still working with some of the same people, or have you found new people to work with?
I have a lot of backed up material that I haven't processed yet.
Okay.
And yeah, so I'm kind of doing the same thing. But along the way, I learned how to do everything.
Yeah.
And, so I didn't have formal training, but I've worked with a couple different artists and I do olive oil bottles and starfish and the vases and what else do I do? The pendants. And I had a health event. I had cancer a couple years ago, and so it's kind of taken away some of my ability to the weight of the blowpipe. Trying to spin out a platter is really heavy, and even yoking it in front of the glory hole is kind of too much, and I have some neuropathy left in my hands. So
okay.
So it's harder for me to do stuff that way.
Yeah.
So I'm probably focusing. I have so much pendant material made up that I'm good to go for years, but I'd focus a little bit more on the fused and slump glass dishes that I'm doing because my hands tolerate that more right now. And of course, when you're blowing, you're always working with an assistant, so
okay.
they can, take stuff that I'm like, okay, I'm going to drop this. Somebody doesn't take it really quick, But I rent studio time when I'm blowing also, so
okay.
It's very expensive to have your own hot shop, and just the electricity to keep the furnace pot going is about a couple $100 a day or more now. So in the furnace pot's where you melt the cullet to start the whole process.
Okay.
So, with clear glass. And
is that something that has to always be on? Like it can't turn off?
Right. It's on 24/7. Yeah. Yeah. So it looks like a big green egg, kind of, like barbecue.
Yeah.
It's about that size. Round, so and you fill it at night with the cullet, and then then the next morning you come back and it's all melted and ready to go. So
okay,
that's the clear stuff, and then the colors that you're adding in is glass frit, which looks like rock salt, and it can be fine in powder form to more coarse.
Okay.
And depending on the sizes, this is probably a question down the road here. Depending on the if it's opaque or transparent, affects how your color presents itself in the platter or anything else you're making in glass. So you usually use a mixture of opaque and transparent together to create what you're doing, and then how you spin things, or how you pick up and heat in the frit affects the overall ending. So
very cool. When you mentioned that like there's heat shock or thermal shock to the glass, have you ever had that happen where you opened too soon and it exploded?
No, I've been careful.
Okay. I was like, that would be terrifying. I feel like every time I opened, I would be like, I know it's been long enough. I think it's been long enough.
No, well, there's a temperature gauge, and even for my kiln, you want it 100 or under. So, I just make sure that it's reading 100 or under. Like, I couldn't swap the kiln out before I came because it was still too hot. And I'm like, yeah. So, trying to shove the last through things, through there before the show. And so, it's like, because it takes forever to, to have stuff run through the kiln. It's 12, 14 hours for a full fuse, and then any of the dishes that I do, it's 2 times through the kiln. So one time you're fusing 2 pieces of glass together, the second time you're slumping or draping into a dish form. So so you have basically the kiln's tied up 2 full days with whatever you can fit in there.
Yeah. So how do you actually get the droop or get the dish shape that you're trying to aim for?
I have molds that you cut, you trace out the molds, and then you cut to the shape of that mold.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of washing involved, so you have to wash, make sure the oils from your hands and the marks from the Sharpies are off the glass before you put it in the kiln. So, you cut it, wash it, then it goes in the kiln, fuses, has to come out again, get washed. Then you put it on the mold, and then it slumps into the mold form or drapes over something to drape into that form.
Okay. So. Right after, you're cutting the glass into what you want it. It's all sharp at that point, right? You got to be pretty careful.
I have a really good stock of Band-Aids in the studio. And I'm always bleeding. And so I had 3 cuts on my index finger and my middle finger on my left hand the other day. And I'm like, oh man, I have so much glass to wash. So I was bleeding all over the place, and I just had to mop it up, put Band-Aids on, and put my hand back in the glove. Because at that point I was washing glass with gloves on, but I like a really thin glove so I can still feel. If I wear too thick of a rubber glove, then I've lost some of my dexterity in my hands from the neuropathy, and I don't have as good a control. And I always wear an apron because otherwise I'm cutting the front of my
Oh, my word.
Well, because when I'm drying it off, I lean part of the glass onto myself so I don't drop it. So probably everybody doesn't have to work like that, but I do. So.
Yep. And when you're talking about the platters and stuff, are those fairly thick or are they pretty thin?
They're about an inch thick. So they're thicker glass. So it's not the same as sheet glass for fusing. It is quite a bit thicker.
Okay.
And so you want them spun out a certain way. You also want enough clear on top. I like them done a certain way. I like my color in a certain spot on there. So you have to kind of color both sides of the platter, and I don't know how to explain that, but it's just the way you pick up the frit and how you work it.
Okay.
But
and when you're cutting the glass, is it common for it to split or crack as you're cutting through?
Yeah. So if I'm cutting something and I have my left hand down and I'm cutting with my right, and if I put too much pressure with my left, then when I go to break it, then it's like whoop, and it's gone, way off to the right. Or sometimes you might not see there's some sort of fracture in the glass, and you put it in the kiln, and it fractures inside the kiln when it's heating. That doesn't happen too often, but it does, and you're like, oh man, that would have been a really nice, tray or whatever, I was making, and then it's usually one piece. It's not like all the pieces, but there's some glass that's a little bit more fragile. I'd recently got a glass that was just very temperamental, and so anytime I went to cut and then break it, it had a will of its own, and it was winging off all over the place. So I'm like, man, I'm going to make magnets out of this because it's not cooperating. So,
yeah. Glasswork is always fascinating to me because of the limitations of it, the thermal shock type of stuff. You hit it just right with a hard object and it breaks. Or, you're constantly have to be careful. Yet it's also very hard and heavy. So it's an interesting medium to work with.
Well, and since I work in 2 different mediums, molten glass, it's endless the amount of things that you can do with that.
Yeah.
And I would have to say my pendants are very hardy, so you have to be very intentional to try and break my pendants. Maybe the fused glass dishes could be more easily broken, but so
nice.
It depends on what you're, how you're using the mediums. And
So you grew up in the retail and with working in the family business. During that time, was there anything that kind of made you think at some point I want to be an artist or kind of get into that world?
I wanted to be a marine biologist.
Okay. That
didn't happen. I don't know what happened to that dream, but no. And then when I was in college, I was studying to be a speech pathologist.
Okay.
I didn't finish that. I got sick and had come home, and then went back to work for my parents. I don't know. I've always done things with my hands. I've always crocheted, I've knit. I'm actually a basket weaver that somehow got into glass. But I've been doing glass now for 14 years, and I've woven tons of baskets, and I guess I've always just done. I'm industrious, so if I'm watching a movie, I'm knitting a prayer shawl.
You want to be moving.
Yeah, I'm doing something. I guess I tend to have that happening all the time. So
very nice. With basket weaving, this is, I know, kind of a tangent, but I feel like that craft is disappeared we used to be, for gift baskets and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
we used to be able to find baskets and stuff like that, but now, like, they're very difficult to find. Is that something that you've seen through?
I think there's pockets of people that do it, and I think when you start to kind of get involved in a niche,
Yeah.
then it's like, oh, everybody's doing it.
Right.
But I think there's still, there's still the Nantucket baskets from back east, and I typically weave in round reed that I dye myself. I do some cedar, but there's a lot of processing with the cedar basket beforehand, and access to cedar. So, yeah, and I think also with some of the other countries that are able to do it, so inexpensively to
Right.
have a handcrafted. Anytime you're handcrafting anything, you can't get what it's worth the person's time to create it. So,
Right.
I think there's the sustainability factor. People that weave baskets are probably not weaving it for a business,
Yeah.
a livelihood business. It might be a secondary,
Yeah.
so.
Well, and that's the thing when it came to the baskets. It's like the amount of work that goes into one basket, and then people when you're trying to find them, for lower cost. It's like, but there's so much work that went into it. How can somebody be reselling this for as cheap as they are?
Yeah, that's hard. And so the first time I learned to weave, I had approached a basket weaver and said, "Well, do you teach?" Oh, yeah. Well, she taught me, and I made my first basket, and it was like my first little bowl in glass, and it was a little wonky. And then I'm like, I saw how it came together, and I think that's what I like about glass also, is taking this raw form and then being able to turn it into something that I can then utilize in my kitchen or my home. And that it's like discovering the secrets to the universe for me.
Yeah.
It's not Stephen Hawking's, but it's but I saw how it came together, and I think I liked that. So I liked seeing with the baskets or the glass that you take this blob of molten glass and then you can make this out of it. And so yes, I think that intrigues me and keeps me interested. So
Yeah. Well, and I think when it comes to any of those things, when you're taking raw material and turning it into something that's useful or beautiful, there's a different aspect to you. Well, one, you feel more connected to it because you've actually seen that whole process.
Mm-hmm.
But there is something empowering about that. Like, every once in a while my brain runs off and it's like, what would happen if electricity was gone tomorrow? I'm like, I'd be dead within a week. Like, it's like when you start relearning these things that have been passed down for so many generations, it's definitely empowering because you're like, oh, that's one more thing I know. The world could end and I could still continue to do this.
I could make a basket, but unless you had some sort of pedal power for electricity and you could have somebody that could sustain it for 14 hours plus, I'm not going to be running my kiln. So, yeah, but yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. So then, as you've continued to kind of hone your craft with glass, what are ways that you've kind of distinguished your glass and your style from other producers?
I don't know. I guess I could say that I don't know if this probably doesn't answer your question, but I like to work in a lot of colors. So I like to have a huge variety of types. So that with the fused stuff, I like to make a variety of dishes that then you can incorporate into, if you're having friends over for crackers and cheese and a glass of wine, that you can put it on this cool little platter. So
Yeah.
I like it to be mixed in with stuff. I make soap dishes and spoon rests. So I don't know how I differ. I remember when I started doing Birkenstocks that I thought, oh gosh, there's so-and-so's doing it and so-and-so's doing it. And I thought, no, you just have to, provide good quality work, and good customer service. And I have to tune that out and just do what I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as far as the pendant, it's all about matching. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, and that point I think is also very good too for people that are starting businesses or in business. there's nothing new under the sun in the sense of types of businesses or things like that. Like all of us are some variation of somebody else's business. And so you have to just focus on what you can do within your business and how you operate it with your customer service, how you do your products and things like that. Because if you just sit there and compare to everyone else, you're going to be like, oh, well, they're doing that and they're doing that. And, you know.
Right. And then you
never do anything.
Right. I don't think most people work at the same volume that I do for the fused glass.
Mm-hmm.
And that I also started by accident.
Okay.
So I was just doing pendants only. And then I decided to monkey around. I didn't know what I was doing again. And started to fuse a couple dishes. And then I was giving them away as gifts to family and friends. And I'm like, oh, I really like doing this. And so then I started doing more. And then I would add it to, I do a couple little local craft shows. And then recently, probably in the last few years, I've added it to, I have a few stores that actually take the dishes. It's very difficult for me to keep up with life and trying to manufacture enough stuff.
Yes.
Because I'm one person. So, but the dishes added to the shows, you know, and then I had the pendants and the dishes. And so it just rounded everything out. And people come, you know, when I'm at a show and it's just, I have so many colors and the pendants there's so many colors in the pendants and they're kind of like, you know, they're overwhelmed because there's just a lot of choices. So I guess I like a lot of color choice. You know, everybody has something else they're drawn to. And I know when I'm doing a show, people would come and they like one pendant that they want to see more. And I'm like, well, I have 50 other blue ones, you know?
Yeah.
And so they'll look at those, but they always go back to the thing that drew them to my table in the first place. And they'll almost always buy the one that first pulled them over to look at. Even if they've looked at 50 or 100 more, they're like, nope, I want that one. Okay.
Very cool. Nice. So as we mentioned at the top of the show, the name of your business is Jellyfish Creations. Where did the name come from?
Well, you probably figured out I'm a little quirky, so I always look for the whimsy in something, and hot molten glass is transparent and fluid, and so is a jellyfish.
Oh, very cool.
So that's my story there. Yeah. So.
Nice. As you've continued to grow, are there certain artists or glassblowers that you follow that have kind of influenced how you've done your work?
Well, I worked for a time with Ed Schmidt out of Bellingham, and he's he has his own business and also is extremely well respected within the glass community. He's taught at Pilchuck Glass, and yeah, I'm not. I would say I'm only executing 40% of what's in my head.
Okay.
So with life, I just don't have time to do everything I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And so I might see something and go, well, I think I want to kind of do something like that. But then I'm just so busy with what I'm already doing that it doesn't happen. So I wouldn't say especially, but Ed was a great teacher when I worked with him. Very patient, and I learned tons from him. So
nice. During your time with glasswork, is there any specific project or certain piece that was really memorable for you?
I'm not doing giant installation works because probably no.
Yeah.
I have blown, vases and, different things, the olive oil bottles. But if I was blowing to create an installation, then yes, if I was working at the level of Julie and I had assistants all over the place, then yeah, I could maybe say that, yes, I had this one thing that I did, but I'm more of your craftsperson or kitchen artist, so I would, no, that's probably not something that I could speak to.
No,
but
that's great. So for people that are listening and maybe have thought about glass blowing or are interested in it, where would you say is a good place for them to start?
Locally, the Shack Center in Everett They have blow your own experiences, and coming up in the fall, at least I know they used to do this. I've never blown down there, but I know they do these things. They'll have a blow your own pumpkin experience. I would say do the blow your own experience. You get a little bit of hands-on, but there's, a trusted, trained person working alongside you. And that's what kind of sparked it for me, was making my silly little bowl. Then you can't take it home that night. It has to come back the next day, and get whatever you've done. But because it has to sit in the annealing oven overnight. But yeah, I would say, probably locally for people here, the Shack Center.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if any of the glass artists right here offer blow your own experiences or not. But the Shack also, I know, offers classes. And,
Okay.
yeah, I would just say go get your feet wet.
Yeah.
It's fun, and if you like to see how things go from, one to another, physical shape, then, and you're not afraid, of the glass blowing. You're not touching the end of the blowpipe. That's really hot, and there's common sense safety practices, that, so.
Yeah. Nice. Very cool. So tell me about the pieces that you're going to be bringing to the Loft for the featured artist of the month.
Pendants. So, and then some of my dishes, and then I'm hoping to get a couple of my embossed dishes that have like a scene or something behind it.
Oh, cool.
Done, but timing through the kiln,
Yes.
It's tricky. So
Yeah.
if they're not here at the beginning of the show, come back and look, and I'll be dropping things off during the show. So
Awesome.
but I'll have a lot of the fused dishes, kind of expanding on what's in the Loft already.
Okay.
I have, so.
Very cool. And for those of you listening, this is for September of 2023. So the featured artist of the month goes through the third week of that month, or the month prior to about the second or third week in the follow in through September. So be sure to stop in and check it out before it's gone. I hope my scheduling of the podcast didn't screw up any of the pieces you're bringing. So
No, when I go home, I'll refill the kiln, and we're on our way again.
Okay, awesome. See, guys, it wasn't my fault. Please don't blame me. All right. Well, we like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, what purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most in the last 3 months?
Oh, when I cruised over these, I was thinking $100 or more, $100 or less.
If you've got something over 100 as well, you're welcome to use it.
I love to shop the street fairs, so it was probably a street fair item.
Nice. All right. Who is the most influential person outside of your family in your life?
I don't know. I would say my mother and father had a big impact on me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure. I'm a blend. I'm
Yeah.
a blend of, people that have surrounded me probably.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Nice.
I can't name one person.
Nope, that's fine. This is a fill in the blank question. I know this is weird, but I've always wanted to blank. You done everything you wanted to do?
No, well, it wouldn't be weird, but I don't know. But I told you ahead of time that it was my mom that stumped me, and she doesn't fly, and she wanted to hang glide, and this came up in an open meeting at a church event, and I was dumbfounded. So I guess when I spoke to you about that I'm totally stumped on my own things.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's great. And I think that's why the question's fun, because sometimes people have some things that you're like, I don't understand. Why is that something you would want to do? But, but in the way of like, compared to what some of the other things you don't like. And so I think it's really cool.
I don't know.
That's all right. Who is an interesting or fascinating person that I should interview next?
Wow. I don't know. Or are you, I don't know. I guess I don't know who you interview typically. Who do you normally interview?
I've interviewed people from all over, all sorts of walks of life. Lots of business owners, influential people in our community, some comedians, some musicians, lots of artists. So
Okay.
kind of the whole gambit. I'm really the focus of the Camino Voice started with Camino Stanwood area, but it's now kind of expanded to the Pacific Northwest. So people within this area, I'm always looking for more or new and interesting interview people. So, and if you don't, go ahead.
Well, I guess, what about somebody from like Safe Harbor Clinic? I don't know if you've interviewed
No,
somebody,
I haven't.
That could speak more about how healthcare could be more sustainable, or how, the Safe Harbor Clinic does, helps out with people that are disadvantaged for healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe that's something that could be opened up, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, and I think that's so important. The healthcare system, I mean, we don't have to go off into it, but obviously it's a massive struggle. It's one of the top 3 reasons for bankruptcy in America. And it's one of those things that obviously health things that happen are not planned. So they come out of nowhere, and it could set someone that was doing perfectly fine in life on this whole new path and trajectory. And I don't think that's fair. Not just fair. I don't think that's how a country should treat or help its people that live within it.
Right. And I've known some people that have volunteered for Safe Harbor, and I think when I was going through my own cancer journey, the cost, even though I had the gold plan then, it was still very expensive to go through all of that. And so, I guess that's something that's close to me is, finding ways to make healthcare affordable and just if people don't know it exists, that maybe that, that's something, and not to feel ashamed either, to come and get help, So.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the shout out for them. All right. And lastly, what piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Don't worry about what other people think as much. To listen to your own internal voice if you can hear it at that time, but maybe at 20 you can't.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's quiet and you're not sure. But try to, within the bounds of, politeness, try to follow your own path and don't try to please everybody.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you.
All right. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Julie Rozell for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out Camino Cider Fest coming to Camino Commons September 2nd. That's Labor Day weekend. So get your tickets. I'll have a link below. And thank you again to Julie for joining me on today's episode. And for more information on this episode, you can go into the show notes right below here or go to CaminoCommons.com/podcast. That's CaminoCommons.com/podcast. Thanks for listening and see you next time.